Welcome to this special episode of the John-Henry Westen Show, where we are going to be talking to a lawyer who handled the cases for priests and rabbis in New Jersey, in New York, and California, which actually resulted in them being, or the governors being forced to allow them to continue their religious services. You're going to want to stay tuned. Before we begin, let me remind you that you really need to go directly to lifesitenews.com because we are being censored. We're being censored by Facebook, by Twitter, and yes, by YouTube as well. So you need to stay with us directly. Please go to lifesitenews.com. On the right top right-hand side, you're going to find a subscribe button. Hit it so that you can stay in touch with us and have the full unfiltered. Let's begin as we always do at the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. It is so good we have with us today Chris Ferrara. Chris is a special counsel for the Thomas More Society, who have been doing just incredible work on defending life, faith, family, and freedom all around the United States. And in fact, they have some parts of their organization that work internationally as well. And Chris, welcome to the program. So glad you're here with us.
Thanks for having me on. It's a
pleasure.
This
is an incredible thing because we have suffered, Catholics, Christians, and obviously people of other faith have suffered greatly in this, in fact, for almost a year now, with denial of the holy sacrifice of the Mass, religious services, and all sorts of insanity. And you're right there on the front lines fighting this. So let me say, just from all of us, thank you.
Well, it's a privilege and an honor to represent the people I've been representing, and it's an unusual alliance in two of the three cases. In New Jersey, we have an Orthodox rabbi and a Catholic priest affiliated with the Society of St. Pius X. In New York, we have four Orthodox Jews and a Catholic school mother in Brooklyn, and two Catholic priests in upstate New York challenging COVID-19 restrictions. And in California, we have another priest of the Society of St. Pius X in California who has mission churches in 4 different California counties.
Amazing.
And so we have a unique combination of people here, and so far we've had success, thank God.
What an incredible, very interesting alliance that's gone on. It really is arguing for the freedom of religious freedom in a way that's being totally restricted by the state, and from all sorts of different groups. That in itself is very interesting. But I noticed something with your cases. You're talking about individual priests and individual rabbis. So you're not then arguing for the diocese. The bishops are kind of out of this question, at least for the cases that you're dealing with.
Yeah, it's really rather embarrassing that the mainstream church has refrained from launching challenges to COVID-19 restrictions on divine worship in churches and cathedrals. Not only that, they've gone beyond what the state requests. They seem quite eager to give to Caesar not only what is Caesar's, but what is God's. They're bending over backwards, operating under capacity limits that are beyond even what the state requires. And they just don't seem to be willing to challenge the power of the state. So in representing claimants in these cases, we've had to go to people who have the hardihood to stand up and say no. And that includes an interesting parallel of plaintiffs. We have, on one hand, Orthodox Jewish members of various Orthodox Jewish communities, and we have priests of the Society of St. Pius X. So in all three cases, these so-called outliers are the ones who have launched the successful claims.
Interesting. Now, one of the things that has played into the success of your cases has been one of the challenges by a diocese, by the Brooklyn diocese that made it to the Supreme Court. Can you tell us what that was, how that went, and how that's impinging upon your cases?
Well, what happened in the Brooklyn diocese case is that finally one Bishop DiMarzio in Brooklyn, had enough, and he was talking in that case about something called the Cluster Action Initiative imposed by Governor Cuomo as an overlay to his already draconian restrictions in New York. And under the Cluster Action Initiative, merely because a certain number of PCR tests in Brooklyn mostly and other counties were positive, he declared a total closure of the counties. And in churches, there was a 10-person cap in his so-called red zone. And in the so-called orange zone, there was a 25-person cap, no matter how large the church. So you could have a cathedral that seats a couple of thousand people. If it's in the red zone, only 10 people are allowed. If it's in the orange zone, only 25 people are allowed. So Bishop DiMarzio brought an action in the federal district court. It was unsuccessful. He went to the Second Circuit, did not get relief there, and went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, so religious liberty is hanging by a thread, as we can see, struck down the 10-person cap and the 25-person cap, saying that those caps were neither neutral nor generally applicable. And if you want to get into what those terms mean, we can talk about the various legal tests that are being applied in these cases and how they're playing out in the cases that I'm handling.
Right. Well, I think a couple factors there in what you just said. One is thank God for Amy Coney Barrett. But I think another and a very interesting one is Justice Gorsuch, who wrote the decision, I thought, rather incredible, some of his statements, especially where he compares the restrictions that were being put on by the governor and then compares them to the liberal allowance that the governor's giving to, for instance, liquor stores. I thought that was really neat. What'd you make of that?
Well, Gorsuch wrote the concurring opinion. The majority opinion of the court is what they call a per curiam opinion, which is not signed by any particular justice. Mm-hmm. But the concurring opinion gives you a window into the thinking of the court's majority. And Gorsuch is stating a principle that's really very simple, and I'm amazed that it's been ignored consistently by the courts before Brooklyn Diocese. And it's simply this: what's good for Costco is good for the church. Mm-hmm. If you're allowing secular activities indoors to operate with 100% capacity, or perhaps 50% capacity, you have to accord the same freedom to churches, at least, if not more so, in terms of occupancy. Yeah. So the Supreme Court said enough of this nonsense where the courts were saying, well, movie theaters are closed, mm-hmm. and concert halls are closed, so therefore churches can be closed. As Gorsuch's concurring opinion makes clear, it isn't enough that you can point to a couple of secular activities that have been closed down. What you have to justify is why many other secular activities are not restricted, whereas churches are. And that's the correct standard to apply. Right. And when you see that secular activities are permitted to operate and that churches are subjected to tight restrictions, then what is called strict scrutiny is triggered under the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment.
Okay. So this is very interesting because part of the decision was based on what's called essential services. And we all remember very fondly as this debate was going on among the governors, and they were allowing, in some cases, abortion centers to remain open, and liquor stores and sometimes pot stores and whatnot. But they're closing churches. And one of the things, again, is about what's considered essential that was mentioned in the Supreme Court case as well. And it was President Trump who sort of said he declared that religious services are also essential. How did that play in? Did that play in at all? Or what does that mean?
Well, there I would have to refer you to an important dissenting opinion by Judge O'Scanlan in the Ninth Circuit in the Harvest Rock Church case, which made its way to the Supreme Court, and they obtained relief in the Supreme Court as well. And what Judge O'Scanlan said in that case is that when you're talking about restricting churches as opposed to secular gatherings, the inquiry turns out really not to be about the risk of viral transmission, because there's a risk of viral transmission in all of these activities which are indoors, whether it's a warehouse, a meatpacking plant, Costco, Walmart, a train station, a bus station, mass transit vehicles. There's viral transmission in all of these locations. So Judge O'Scanlan went through this list of favorites in California, all the favorite businesses, and he said there's no principled reason to distinguish them from churches. So what is the real distinction? And Judge O'Scanlan, and I believe the Supreme Court is endorsing his dissent here, said basically the only distinction is that the state considers the secular activities essential and the church-related activities not essential. But get this, John-Henry, in churches under the California regime, which is called the Blueprint for a Safer Economy, if a church is used for a favored activity, like providing social services such as a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen, that's okay. You just can't worship in churches. So it's literally the case that the same people who are not allowed to sit in pews during Mass could run a soup kitchen or a homeless shelter in the same church building. Yeah. So what's the real distinction? They just don't like the secular, the church-related activities. They don't consider them essential.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And that's religious discrimination in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And so how is this playing out in the cases that you're involved with? What's been going on there?
We'll take them one at a time. We started off in New Jersey. We had a rabbi in Lakewood, New Jersey, and we had a Catholic priest in North Caldwell, New Jersey, a priest of the Society of St. Pius X. Under the regime imposed by Governor Murphy, first there was a total closure of churches and synagogues. Then there were some limited capacities. Currently it's at 25% or 150 people, whichever is less. So under a 25% capacity limitation, the synagogue is basically out of the running because it only seats 30 people. You need at least 10 people for Orthodox Jewish prayers. It's called a minyan, which means that you only get 7 people under a 25% capacity limit, and you can't even have the minyan, the 10-person minimum. It has to be 10 adult males. So Governor Murphy, thinking he was clever, said, oh, by the way, it's 25%, but you can always have at least 10 people. And another district court said, the governor is clearly trying to avoid claims by Orthodox Jewish congregants. He's gerrymandering his restrictions. So now 10 people are allowed, but no more than 25%. So in a synagogue that seats 30, you can only have 10, which means no congregation. Because the minyan is needed to start the services, but you can't have a congregation for anything beyond that 10-person limit. So if you have a bar mitzvah, people can't attend the bar mitzvah. If you have a circumcision, strictly speaking, the baby can't attend his own circumcision because the baby's the 11th person. The bride can't attend her wedding, although the groom could if he's part of the 10-person minimum. Well, that's ridiculous. So we challenged that. Then, of course, the Catholic priests had a similar problem. Father Robinson, who is the Catholic priest of the Society of St. Pius X, has a chapel that seats only 100 people. At 25% capacity, that's only 25 people per Mass. If 5 of them are on the altar at a high Mass, that leaves only 20 people. And so he'd have to have 5 Masses, at least, on a Sunday to accommodate his congregation. And under the principle of bination, which is a church norm, a priest can't celebrate more than 2 Masses per day, except in very extraordinary circumstances, but in no event 5 Masses a day. And so the congregation, in the meantime, has grown to the point where it's almost 200 people. So now you're talking about 8 or 9 Masses a day. So we challenged that. We did not get an injunction in the district court. We went to the Third Circuit. We tried to get an injunction pending appeal from the Third Circuit, and they denied us the injunction pending appeal, which allowed us to go directly to the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court did in New Jersey was, based on the Brooklyn Diocese case, it vacated the district court's refusal to give us an injunction in New Jersey and sent it back for reconsideration in light of the Brooklyn Diocese decision. And when the Supreme Court does that, it's basically saying to the lower court, you got it wrong the first time around. Now we have this decision we've just handed down in Brooklyn Diocese. This time, get it right. So we're back to square one in the district court. And we're obviously going to say that churches should get the same capacity limits as Costco, Walmart, homeless shelters, schools, which are at 100% capacity, and a whole list of other favored activities. That's New Jersey.
Okay. And
New York is a different situation. We can get into that one if you want to.
Well, what is novel in the other situations? Is there anything that is dissimilar in the other cases?
Well, in all three cases, we're challenging capacity limits, which is important to note. Now, in the Brooklyn Diocese case, the Supreme Court was looking at these hard caps. Only 10 people allowed inside a church. In the red zone, only 25 people allowed. In the orange zone, that was the focus in that case, because the diocese wasn't challenging the underlying capacity limits of 50% or 33%, and what is it? It's 25% in the red zone and 50% in the orange zone. There was no challenge to those. Well, what we're saying in New Jersey is, and what the Supreme Court has made clear, is that the capacity limits themselves have to be applied fairly to churches and secular activities alike. So, if a retail establishment is at 100% or 50%, so must the church be. That's the issue in New Jersey, and that is an issue that's now squarely presented. Another issue in New Jersey, and this is very important, is the mask mandate. Everyone is being told to wear these stupid pieces of cloth on his face to stop the spread. Well, after 9 months of this nonsense, we're told that it's worse than ever, aren't we? We're told that the cases are surging, we need new lockdowns, so the masks haven't worked. There's abundant research on this before, let us say, April or May of this year, that the masks worn by the general population are pretty much useless in limiting the spread. Now, what we're saying in New Jersey is there are numerous exceptions to the mask mandate. There are exceptions for health, safety, impracticability. The organizers of gatherings don't have to wear masks. And the most compelling exception is for restaurants. Now get this. In New Jersey, restaurants are at 25% capacity. But you can have tables of 8 in a restaurant. So you can eat in the restaurant without your mask on. You can drink without your mask on at a table of 8. And the table of 8 is facing each other, usually 4 on a side. Only a couple of feet apart at most, maybe as little as 18 inches apart. And they're dining, maybe for an hour, maybe for 2 hours. If the owner lets them, they'll sit there with a multi-course meal for 4 hours or longer, drinking wine, spewing out viral particles across the table at each other. But the governor doesn't care about that, because you can dine without a mask for as long as you please. But you can't sit in a church 6 feet apart from your fellow parishioners, everybody facing in the same direction, nobody talking at each other, but all facing the altar. That's not permitted. It gets even more ridiculous in New Jersey. In New Jersey, Murphy realizes he's got a bit of a problem with forcing Catholics to wear masks and Orthodox Jewish congregants to wear masks throughout the religious service. For one thing, you have to receive Holy Communion. For another, it's ridiculous to say that a couple has to exchange wedding vows with face diapers on. I mean, that's laughable. And baptisms can't be conducted. You can't baptize a baby or even an adult with a mask on. So he tried to create a religious exemption to his mask mandate. So under his executive order, there are a couple of them actually, there's a provision where you can remove your mask briefly or momentarily for a religious purpose or a religious reason. Now, how does that work? Are they going to situate monitors at churches and synagogues to make sure people aren't taking their face coverings off for too long? Is there going to be a police officer at the door looking inside and shouting, "That's long enough, put the mask back on"? It's ludicrous. So what we're arguing for in New Jersey, and the Supreme Court granted certiorari on this question over and above the capacity limits, we're going to be litigating the question of whether you can grant open-ended exemptions to the mask mandate for all kinds of secular gatherings, including dining in restaurants, while limiting the religious exemption to a brief moment. So that's another issue that's unique in New Jersey.
Right. Now, there is another issue that I don't think pertained to your cases, but I'd like to hear your opinion on. It was with regard to the other restriction of on mass where things haven't been so extreme. It's the issue of Holy Communion. Some jurisdictions have actually restricted communion on the tongue, saying it should be delivered in the hand only. Some different countries have put it behind plexiglass. You have to have your mask on when you receive it from the priest with his mask on and behind plexiglass through a little hole in the glass. It means all sorts of craziness. Has there been any of that in any of the cases that you're either working on or heard about?
We haven't had that in any of my 3 cases. In all 3 jurisdictions where I'm litigating these issues, New York, New Jersey, and California, I don't think even those governors are stupid enough to try to regulate divine worship in such a particular manner. That entangles the state and religion and really interferes with religious practice in a way that would not pass constitutional scrutiny in any court. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You can't ban Holy Communion.
Right.
You would have to ban basically anyone putting anything in his mouth in the course of any activity in order to have a neutral and generally applicable regulation. And they can't do that, obviously. People have to eat, and that's why there's a restaurant exception. So once you create exceptions, you can't impose an exceptionless rule on religion only.
Right.
So that's not an issue in any of my 3 cases.
Okay. And so
the issue is, in all 3 cases, is how long you're supposed to keep your mask on, if at all, during divine worship. And our argument is very simple. First of all, the evidence is mounting by the day that the masks are useless. But even assuming they're not useless, if you're going to make some people exempt from mask wearing on an open-ended basis when they're exercising, when they're dining, when there's a safety consideration, when it's impractical to wear a mask, you've got to give a religious exemption. And the religious exemption is basically this. When we're in church, we don't have to wear a mask. When we leave, if you insist, we'll put one on. When we go in, we'll have one on. We'll take it off when we enter the sanctuary. It's really that simple. And it's ridiculous to insist that Catholics and Orthodox Jewish congregants be sitting during a religious service taking the mask on, putting it on, taking it off, putting it on, taking it off, depending upon the stage of the liturgy or the prayer service that you're at. That's just absurd. It just shows how silly the mask requirement is. By the way, I don't know if you saw this video. Governor Murphy of New Jersey was confronted in a restaurant using the restaurant exemption from the mask mandate along with his family. Someone came into a restaurant. He's sitting at a closely packed table with what appears to be family members sitting across from each other. Looks like he's having sirloin steak and mashed potatoes. That's how good the video is. And someone walks by and starts shouting obscenities at him. And I can understand that. People are fed up with this nonsense. He's sitting there having a good time with his family. You see on the table wine bottles. So they're drinking wine and having a nice dinner, inches away from each other, talking for however long they wish. It could have been 2 hours. And he's confronted by the people who pass by and hurl obscenities at him. They're sick and tired of this nonsense. And what happens? You see as the video progresses, go look it up, you can Google it yourself. You see that Murphy suddenly puts his mask on for show because he knows he's being recorded in the middle of his meal. This shows what a total sham this whole mask mandate is. You can eat all day long if the owner lets you without your mask. And of course, we see politicians violating the mask mandate everywhere. You know about the French Laundry incident with Governor Newsom in California, right?
Yes. This is the thing.
He goes out with 20 or 30 of his friends and dines in the French Laundry. Yep. I think it's $400 a plate. And they eat, drink, and they're being merry for all the time they're there. No masks. They get up and they're conversing. No masks. So what does that show you? We call that the French Laundry Protocol. The French Laundry Protocol is what should be followed from now on. Yep. Forget the virus. Don't live in fear of the virus. Go out with your friends and family. Forget the masks and the social distancing because they haven't worked. And just live your life. That's what Governor Newsom did in the French Laundry. Yeah. So we're saying the time has come for everyone to demand that they be allowed to live their lives just like Governor Newsom was doing.
And I think that's exactly it. We seem to be living Orwell's 1984, Animal Farm, where some pigs are more equal. And they really have made it so that the potentates think that they don't have to abide by the mandates that they're imposing on everyone else. It really is a sickening state of affairs. But really to advocate taking those same freedoms, which we deserve every bit as much as those who lord it over us.
No, I tell you what, here's another example of how absurd this whole thing is. It's a charade, a total charade. So Trump has all these rallies during his election campaign. Massive gatherings, most people aren't wearing masks. You don't hear about anybody getting sick or dying at any of these rallies, except for Herman Cain, and who knows where he got the virus. So he's had, a dozen of these gatherings. No one gets sick. And they really can't say that the rallies caused anybody to die, aside from the one exception being Herman Cain. What do the Democrats do in response? Well, Biden, during his campaign, he has rallies consisting of a few cars in a parking lot honking their horns instead of applauding. Meanwhile, the same Democrat politicians are encouraging mass demonstrations in the streets by tens of thousands of people who aren't socially distancing. At the same time, they're calling Trump's rallies super spreader events. And now, even after he claims to be president-elect, it may well turn out to be that way, he's still holding gatherings in parking lots with cars, pretending that the bubonic plague is still out there, and everyone will die unless they keep the charade up. But we've already had innumerable mass gatherings by both protesters and Trump supporters, and everyone knows these mass gatherings are really not a threat to public health and safety, and yet they still keep this charade going on. Biden and his wife show up in their stupid masks. She had a nice gold-studded affair on the other day. Now they're wearing fashion masks to keep this nonsense going. And the whole world is really waking up to the reality that the masks haven't done anything. And now they're telling us it's worse than ever. Yeah. Okay, if it's worse than ever, why don't we just go back to living our lives and let the thing run its course? Because it's obvious that what they've been doing hasn't worked.
Yeah, he's got 100 days of masking planned. On day one, this is
more of the same nonsense that didn't do anything.
Yeah, absolutely unbelievable. What's your parting words for all of us who, again, are very grateful for what you've done and what Thomas More Society has done, and many of the other legal societies that are fighting for freedom to worship?
Well, I would say this. Litigation is one avenue to approach this insanity, and we could win victories here or there. But with the lockdowns, we're dealing with a socio-political, a socio-economic, and even a spiritual phenomenon, the likes of which has never been seen in this country or anywhere in the world during a pandemic. Not even during the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic did we see anything like this. There were measures of limited duration. This is much more than a health measure to address a pandemic. This is an attempt to remake social order on a permanent basis. That's why we're hearing about the Great Reset. Remember, at the beginning, it was 2 weeks to stop the spread. Yeah. Then it was, we have to contain the virus. That went on for 6 or 7 months. Now we're told we have to wait for a vaccine. Mm-hmm. Now that the vaccine is here, we're said, well, not even the vaccine can liberate us from the masks and the social distancing. So basically, this is a program for the complete reorientation of social order under government control. So beyond litigation, I would say to people, it's time to say no. People just have to say enough of this nonsense and live their lives. That's my advice.
Hello, this is John-Henry Westen. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the John-Henry Westen Show YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. There you will find all the past episodes and much more. Thanks again for watching, and may God bless you.